James had always believed that a life could be built the same way a house could, brick by brick, with patience, with trust that the foundation would hold. He met Veronica in his late 20s, when ambition still felt romantic and the future looked wide open. She was warmth in motion, the kind of woman who filled rooms without trying. When she laughed, James felt chosen. When she married him, he felt finished in the best way, as if the long search had ended. Daniel stood beside him at the wedding, his best friend since childhood, the brother he never had. They had grown up on the same street, scraped knees on the same asphalt, shared secrets whispered in the dark. Daniel was quick-witted where James was steady, charming where James was reserved. Together they balanced each other. James trusted him with the easy confidence of someone who had never been betrayed. The first years of marriage were good, not perfect, but honest. Mornings smelled like coffee and toast. Evenings ended on the couch, Veronica's feet tucked under James's thigh. Daniel sometimes dropping by unannounced with a bottle of wine and stories that stretched long into the night. James loved those nights. They felt like proof that nothing essential had changed. But time has a way of shifting weight without making a sound. James worked longer hours. Promotion meant responsibility. Responsibility meant absence. Veronica found herself alone in the house more often, the quiet pressing in on her. She missed being seen. She missed the version of herself who felt electric, who felt wanted in a way that didn't come with schedules and exhaustion. Daniel noticed first. He always noticed things first. It started innocently. Texts about nothing, jokes that lingered a second too long, shared glances when James talked about work. Daniel listened in a way James no longer did, or perhaps no longer could. He remembered details. He made Veronica feel vivid again. The line, when it was crossed, barely made a sound. Veronica told herself it was temporary, a mistake born of loneliness. Daniel told himself it didn't mean anything serious, that James would never know. They both lied badly, but convincingly enough to themselves. The affair slipped into the shape of their days, hidden in ordinary places. The guest room when James was late, the car parked too far down the street, afternoons disguised as errands. Guilt followed Veronica like a shadow. She tried to be better at home, kinder, more attentive. James felt the change, but misunderstood it as renewal. He reached for her, grateful, unaware of the distance that had opened beneath his feet. What gave them away wasn't passion, it was carelessness. James found the phone first, not a message, not a confession, just a name lighting up the screen at the wrong hour, again and again. Daniel. His chest tightened, a warning he ignored. He told himself he was imagining things. Friendship didn't turn into betrayal overnight. Love didn't rot without a smell. Then came the afternoon he came home early. The house was quiet in that unfamiliar way that signals secrecy. James stood in the hallway, briefcase still in his hand, listening to the sound of voices upstairs. Low, intimate, unmistakably close. Time slowed, stretched thin as glass. When he opened the bedroom door, the world cracked. There are moments that rewrite a person. James would later remember small, useless details. The way the light fell across the bed, the smell of Veronica's perfume, Daniel's face caught between shame and defiance. Veronica reached for him, words tumbling out, but none of them could bridge the space that had just opened. Something inside James collapsed, not loudly, not dramatically, but completely. Trust didn't shatter, it dissolved. The man who believed in foundations disappeared, replaced by someone hollowed out by disbelief. Daniel spoke first. Apologies, explanations, all the language of regret. Veronica cried, saying his name, begging him to understand, to forgive. James heard them as if from underwater. The room felt too small, the air too thin. He left without saying a word. For days, James moved through life like a ghost. He went to work. He answered emails. He slept, or pretended to. Rage didn't come all at once. It arrived in waves. Memories poisoned, laughter reinterpreted, years unraveling backward. Every shared moment became evidence. Every kindness, a lie. Daniel called. Veronica left messages that grew increasingly desperate. James ignored them all, clinging to silence as the only thing that still felt his. On the fourth night, he asked Daniel to meet him. Neutral ground, Daniel suggested. A bar. James chose the house instead. When Daniel arrived, he looked smaller, uncertain, stripped of his usual confidence. He talked, filling the space with remorse, with promises, with explanations that asked to be believed. James listened quietly, his face unreadable. Veronica came later, drawn by hope she didn't deserve but couldn't abandon. The three of them stood in the living room, where they had once laughed together, the past pressing in from every wall. James finally spoke. His voice was calm, almost gentle. He talked about trust, about how some betrayals don't leave room for repair. He talked about how love, once broken in a certain way, doesn't bend, it ends. What happened next was fast and irreversible, driven by a clarity that frightened even him. When it was over, the house was silent again, but this time the quiet was final. James sat alone as dawn crept through the windows, illuminating the wreckage of three lives. The rage that had sustained him drained away, leaving only emptiness. There was no relief, no victory, just the crushing weight of what could never be undone. Later, people would try to explain it. They would talk about jealousy, about passion, about a moment of madness. They would dissect Veronica's choices, Daniel's betrayal, James's breaking point. None of it would be enough. A life story is rarely just one act. It is the accumulation of moments. Small neglects, unspoken desires, assumptions left unexamined. By the time the end arrives, it feels both shocking and inevitable. James had once believed in building things that lasted. In the end, all he had left was the knowledge of how easily everything can fall. James didn't run. When the sun was fully up, the house looked almost peaceful from the outside. Curtains still drawn, lawn untouched, a place where nothing remarkable should have happened. Inside, time had stopped, heavy and absolute. James washed his hands in the kitchen sink. The water ran too long. He watched it spiral down the drain and thought, absurdly, about how many times Daniel had stood right there, leaning against the counter, laughing. How many times Veronica had crossed the room barefoot, humming to herself. The house still remembered them, even if the world soon wouldn't. He sat at the table and waited. Sirens arrived before noon. Neighbors gathered at a polite distance first, then closer, curiosity overcoming restraint. Phones appeared. Whispers spread. By evening, the street was crowded with strangers who had nothing to do with any of it, but wanted to see the place where something terrible had happened. That was the amusement. News vans parked crookedly along the curb. Commentators spoke in hushed, excited tones, repeating the same details over and over, polishing the story into something consumable. A love triangle, a betrayal, a breaking point. Headlines competed for drama. for clicks, for the most shocking phrasing. Veronica became a symbol. Daniel became a cautionary tale. James became a monster, then a victim, then a mystery, depending on who was talking. People argued online late into the night. Some said they understood him. Others said there was no excuse. Memes appeared within hours, stripped of context, stripped of humanity. The worst moment of 3 lives turned into entertainment for millions who would never know their voices, their habits, the way they once loved. James watched none of it. In custody, he answered questions plainly. He didn't cry. He didn't defend himself. When asked why, he said only that something had ended and he didn't know how to live past it. There was no grand speech, no satisfaction in his words. At the trial, the room was full every day. People leaned forward in their seats as if watching a play they already knew the ending to, but hoped would surprise them anyway. Testimony replayed the affair in meticulous detail. Private messages were read aloud. Intimate moments became public property. Laughter even broke out once, nervous and inappropriate, when a lawyer misspoke. That laughter echoed longer than it should have. James was sentenced. Cameras flashed as he was led away. Somewhere a producer celebrated good ratings. Somewhere else a stranger shook their head and said, "What a story." Years later, the house was sold. New people lived there. Children played in the yard. Most passers-by had forgotten the names, remembered only that something bad once happened on that street. That, too, was part of the amusement, how quickly horror turns into trivia. And James, sitting in a quiet cell, finally understood the cruelest truth of all. The murders had ended the affair, ended the betrayal, ended 3 lives. But they had not made anything meaningful. They had only fed a world eager to be entertained by other people's destruction. The audience moved on. The silence did not.